Another note is just if you could please make sure you're on mute. It doesn't automatically happen, and we want to make sure that there's few distractions while we're going through the presentation. I also wanted to let you know that we'll be sending a copy of the presentation as well as the recording out to all the folks that registered for today's workshop. So you should see that in either later today or tomorrow sometime. So we'll be taking questions. So we'll be doing the presentation, and then we are allowing plenty of time for questions at the end. While we're going through the presentation, feel free to pop your questions into the chat, or you can also use the idea boards. We've used this for a number of other things, and some folks like to, you know, if a thought comes into your head, or if you want to share something or you have a question, you can pop it. You can go to the link. Sorry, let me get this popped into the chat. So for some of you, this might look familiar. This is the idea boards, and you just go in. Oops, wait, go back. Sorry. You just click the little button, like if you want to put something about planning grants, you just click here and it'll open up this window. You type it in and just hit enter. Just bear in mind you're limited to 120 characters. And then if someone's made a comment that you really like, feel free to give them a thumbs up. Just be careful not to make sure not to erase somebody else's by accident or delete it. So again, it's broken up into sections, just general comments, something about planning grants, something about acquisition grants, capacity grants, and then just sort of a parking lot for anything else. So the purpose of this webinar is to discuss the proposed changes to the planning, acquisitions, and capacity components of the 22-23 or round 9 SALC funding guidelines. So we've allowed about an hour and 15 minutes for the workshop, and we'll begin by just doing a quick overview, very brief overview of the program. Then we'll discuss the proposed changes in this round of guidelines for each component of the program. So we'll leave time at the end, as I mentioned, for questions, public comments, and then we'll also discuss sort of next steps for getting the guidelines finalized. As a reminder, the public comments will be accepted through March 17th, so please email them to salcp@conservation.ca.gov. And also we'll be referring to the draft guidelines at throughout this webinar. So please have these documents handy for reference. And I will pop that chat into the chat as well. The link, where is it? There it is. On this page, you'll see two different PDFs. One of them is the one with all the changes, one shows all the track changes, so it makes it super easy for you to see what was changed in this round. And the other one does not show the track changes. It's a clean version. So if you want to go ahead and open that up so that you have it handy, that would be super. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through the proposed guideline changes, public comments, and then next steps and timeline. Included in the draft program guidelines that I just linked for you are several other documents that are important to the project's success. Public comment is permitted on any of these items, and it includes the guidelines, the capacity acquisition and planning pre-proposals and applications. Those are the appendices. Additional appendices include the grant agreement templates for each of those programs as well, a glossary, and the management plan requirements for those that are choosing to include a planning management plan. Yes, this is, Courtney, the round 9 draft guidelines workshop. So the SALC, so just to begin, I'm just going to very briefly quick overview of the SALC program. It was developed as a component of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program to administer projects eligible for greenhouse gas reduction funds related to Public Resources Code Section 75212 and 75212I, H and I. SALC receives 10% of the 20% of the greenhouse gas reduction funds that are appropriated to the AHSC, as noted. SALC was identified by the Strategic Growth Council as most appropriately administered by the California Department of Conservation. In conjunction with the Natural Resources Agency, the Strategic Growth Council approved the roles of the department and the agency at its July 10th, 2014 meeting. Additionally, SALC has been developed in consultation with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. The principal goals of SALC are to protect agricultural lands, to support infill and compact development, to contribute to carbon neutrality, sustainable land and management practices, support coordinated land use and planning, safeguard the state's economic sustainability and food security, protect biodiversity, enable enduring conservation measures on working lands, build climate resilience, reducing risk from extreme climate events, and contributing to the state's effort to combat climate change, and to advance equity and opportunity for all regions of California. So there are three components to the SALC program. All are focused on agricultural conservation. There is the agricultural conservation acquisitions, which provide grants to protect important agricultural lands under threat of conversion to non-agricultural uses through the acquisition of a voluntary permanent agricultural conservation easement or fee title purchases. There's the sustainable agricultural lands conservation planning, which provides grants to develop and implement plans for the protection of agricultural lands at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses. And then finally, this says new. This is an outdated slide. Sorry about that. This is the second round, so it's kind of new, but not new. The capacity and project development grants, which provide grants to expand organizational capacity and to develop agricultural conservation acquisition projects. So we'll be discussing all three of these components today. So SALC has been up and running for about 9 years. Given the familiarity of the program and the stability of the program basics, today's presentation will be focused really on the material changes between prior guidelines and the draft guidelines for this year. So we're going to go into the details of each of the sorry, I just got distracted by the chat. We're going to be going into within each one of the components of the program. We'll be outlining the different changes that have happened in each one of those, but just sort of generally speaking, the general program updates. I'm sorry, there's two giant trucks outside. I hope you guys aren't hearing them. The updates to the general guidelines includes the disadvantaged communities definition, which now includes lands under control of federally recognized tribes as defined by Cal EPA. And then administrative, there's the reporting of investment targets for all three components of the SALC program. So those are just sort of general updates to the guidelines themselves. So now I'm going to just talk briefly about the changes about the planning grants. Planning grants provide funds to develop plans that conserve agricultural lands by designing and implementing land use policies and accompanying strategies that reduce the threat of conversion to non-agricultural uses and reduce vehicle miles traveled. Plans may also recognize and protect the other co-benefits of conserving agricultural land. This is plans may also recognize and protect other co-benefits of conserving agricultural land. Sorry, this is a component of SALC, incentivizes local, regional, and tribal governments to work closely with stakeholders to develop land use policies and plans that integrate agricultural and land conservation, where local planning has the greatest impact on land use. Multi-benefits allow for optimal planning opportunities, and they can also act as a bridge between state priorities, climate action plans, general land use plans, and other priorities. Let me just do a couple muting here. Hey, Michael, I'm hoping you guys aren't hearing all the noise in my background that just came up. Can you just confirm, Michael, that it's not?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great, thanks. I can barely hear myself, it's so loud. All right, so eligible applicants include counties, cities, local area formation commissions, councils of governments, municipal planning organizations, regional transportation planning agencies, groundwater sustainability agencies, special districts, federally recognized California Native American tribes or non-federally recognized California Native American tribes that is on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Society Commission. Sorry. Partner applicants include resource conservation districts, academic institutions, land trusts, and other agricultural nonprofit organizations who can apply, and they just need to partner with one of the entities that I mentioned before. And if they do apply together, the partners must agree to enter into a memorandum of understanding if they are awarded a grant. Types of projects that are eligible for SALC planning grant. The proposals we want it to obviously be a proposal that is for land use planning that is consistent with the SALC goals. The proposal will avoid greenhouse gas emissions. Projects will support implementation of sustainable communities strategy, and they demonstrate consistency with California planning priorities. So planning grants will reimburse grantees and participating stakeholders for all direct costs, including fully burdened staff costs incurred during the grant performance period and related to the project. All eligible costs must be supported by appropriate documentation. Costs incurred outside of the performance period, indirect overhead costs, travel, food or beverages, and costs for CEQA document preparation are not eligible for reimbursement under this particular program. There is a minimum match funding requirement of 10%, and match funds may be provided directly by the applicant or from other funding sources, such as other grant funds, local government contributions, or donations. So just to note that there's just a couple little minor changes to the planning grants this year. One is that awarded projects can now receive up to 100% funding for eligible planning grant projects found to benefit priority populations. These will also be prioritized for funding and may receive, as I said, 100% of the eligible costs. The selection criteria was also changed to provide additional points that may be provided for proposals that benefit a priority population or residents of priority populations, beginning or veteran farmers and ranchers, or federally recognized or non-federally recognized California Native American tribe. And with that, I will now hand it over to Michael to discuss the acquisition component of the program.
Thank you, Melinda, and hopefully everybody can hear me clearly on the other side.
Sound great.
Doing this hybrid for the first time, so just want to make sure the technology is all there. Okay, so for this next section, I'll go ahead and discuss the acquisition grants portion of the SALC program. As Melinda mentioned earlier, agricultural conservation acquisition grants will be provided to fund the purchase of conservation easements or fee title to agricultural land, including where an easement or fee purchase is part of a buy, protect, sell strategy to conserve the land. It's also important to note that the applicant must demonstrate in their pre-proposal that the property is at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses and will support infill development. And then for the purposes of this program, agricultural land includes both cultivated and non-cultivated lands that support an agricultural use, including gathering and activities that promote healthy trees, shrubs, and perennial forbs for the cultivation of traditional foods, herbal medicine, fibers such as basketry material, and dyes, so long as those activities are led or conducted in partnership with an eligible California Native American tribe or members thereof. So for eligible applicants, cities, counties, nonprofit organizations, resource conservation districts, regional park or open space districts, regional park or open space authorities, and federally recognized and non-federally recognized California Native American tribes are eligible to apply to this component of the program. For eligible costs for all acquisition projects include the purchase of the acquisition. We'll go more into detail about the percentage of that match that the department requires later in this presentation. and then associated costs with that that are associated with that transaction, which include the title report, baseline report, appraisal, staff time, legal, and closing costs, as an example. And then we also fund up to $10,000 for conservation management plans and/or carbon farm plans. As far as the changes that have been made to the acquisition component of the guidelines this round, nothing too significant. We've made updates to the percentage of funding that SALC will provide for all easement fee title projects. We inserted language to promote reduction to potential burdens via management plans, and updated to eligibility to properties expected to be utilized for agriculture, which we'll go into more detail in these next few slides here. So in previous rounds, the SALC program only funded up to 75% of the value of the conservation easement. This round, we have increased that percentage to 90%. So the applicant will only need to provide up to 10% of the easement value for acquisitions. And then we have also proposed in these guidelines that tribes or tribal nonprofit organizations interested in fee title acquisition projects may now receive up to 100% of the fair market value. And then as far as equity goes, so another proposed edit to the guidelines this round was to address potential burdens that acquisition projects may pose on disadvantaged communities. While not required, the SALC program now highly encourages the development and implementation of a management plan that, to the extent feasible, reduces potential burdens to disadvantaged and low-income communities, which include reductions in air pollution caused by agricultural operations, reductions in agricultural runoff, and/or the reduction of degradation to the surrounding ecosystems. And then the last edit made for the acquisition component of this program was to the eligibility criteria. So in previous rounds, the language read the property is expected to continue to be used for and is large enough to sustain commercial agricultural production. The language now states that the property is expected to be used for and is large enough to sustain commercial agricultural production. So very similar, but the intent of this proposed edit is to support beginning and new farmers and or ranchers who recently purchased property or leasing property that may not have an existing commercial operation, where the easement may be a mechanism for them to start a commercial operation in the future, or such as if the property is currently being fallowed, that is being rested for soil health purposes. So that's pretty much it for the acquisitions. I'll now go ahead and hand it over to Artemis Moser, who will be discussing the capacity and project development program.
Good afternoon, everyone. So eligible applicants for the capacity and project development grants are cities, counties, nonprofit organizations, resource conservation districts, regional park or open space districts, regional park or open space authorities, and federally recognized California Native American tribes, or a non-federally recognized California Native American tribe that are on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission. These are all eligible to apply for capacity funding. Nonprofit applicants must have the conservation of agriculture, rangeland, or farmland among their stated purposes or as expressed in the entity's adopted policies. Nonprofit applicants must hold a tax exemption as defined under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code and be qualified to do business in the state. So a couple of updates. If your organization does not have the conservation of agriculture, rangeland, farmland, or cultural resources as your stated purposes, you are eligible for Tier 1 funding on the condition that you use a portion of that funding to incorporate the conservation of agriculture, rangeland, farmland, or tribal cultural resources into the stated purposes or adopted policies. SALC capacity grants will be provided to build organizational and financial capacity to develop agricultural conservation acquisition projects, assist eligible applicants in developing agricultural conservation easement and fee acquisition projects in preparation for submitting such projects for acquisition funding in future rounds, and provide funds to cover associated costs to help close agricultural conservation acquisition projects, where the cost of the acquisition is covered by an alternate source of funding. Agricultural conservation acquisition projects developed using this funding must meet the eligibility criteria listed within the acquisition section of the guidelines to be considered for funding. For example, staff time, baseline documentation, escrow costs, legal consulting, and title reports are all eligible for reimbursement, but please review the guidelines for the full list of eligible and ineligible costs. And new this round, capacity grants may be provided to a federally recognized or non-federally recognized California Native American tribe to develop a new 501c3 organization like a tribal land trust that will partner with them to meet the goals of SALC. And a brief overview of the capacity grants. So we aim to award about 5% of the available funds of the money that we get each year. There's two types of tiers. There's tier 1 funding for grants of up to $100,000. Tier 2 grants of up to $250,000. There are 3-year grant terms with no match funding requirement. These points are all going to be discussed in greater detail in the following slides. So the previous round allocated $3 million for capacity grants with an additional $3 million to be made available for the same purpose in each of the next 2 solicitations. And due to high demand for capacity grants last round, SGC is aiming to award approximately 5% of the available funds for capacity rounds, with additional monies to be made available in the next solicitation. So this should provide a little bit more flexibility in the amount of money that we have to spend for capacity grants. And we have removed the number of staff number requirement for tier 1 applicants, and instead are focusing these grants for organizations to build the organizational and financial capacity to develop the agricultural conservation acquisition projects. Tier 1 applicants may request an increase in funding up to a total grant award of $250,000 during their grant term if they can demonstrate the organizational and fiscal capacity to administer additional funds within the remaining grant term. Award increases shall be prorated based on the remaining grant term, shall be at the discretion of the executive director of SGC, and may only be made if funding is available. We have, for tier 2 funds, we have also removed the staff limitation for these applicants. And these grants are available for applicants to expand existing organizational capacity to develop agricultural acquisition projects and and are available for applicants who can demonstrate the organizational and fiscal capacity to complete their work outlined in their plan. Pass it back over to Melinda.
Great. Thanks, Artemis and Michael. So that was sort of a whirlwind trip through the updates for this round of guidelines. So it leaves us plenty of time for questions or comments, and apologies for for maybe having the wrong link. Anyway, hopefully everyone's into the group now. So we are happy to open things up. So there's a few ways that you can provide your comments on the draft guidelines. We'll discuss, and you can put questions into the chat now, or if you want to make any comments or put anything into the idea boards. And you can also provide formal comments through email or by hard mail. So a few different options for you there. And again, as a reminder, comments need to be received by noon on March 17th. So with that, let's see what we have next. I'll kind of go over the timelines real quick. So comments on the draft guidelines will be accepted, as I mentioned, through noon on March 17th. Between then and April 14th, program staff and management will meet to consider the public comments and to make revisions to the guidelines in light of those comments. The Strategic Growth Council meeting is scheduled for April 26th at 1 p.m., which you're welcome to join either in person or online. And it'll be held virtually, as I mentioned, virtually and in person, in order to consider the draft guidelines. A staff report and the draft final guidelines will be posted to the SGC website no later than April 14th. So there is that 10-day requirement. Also of note, once guidelines are posted, we'll be scheduling a series of application workshops to provide guidance on those interested in submitting a pre-proposal or an application to one or any of the components of the program. And just as a reminder, we say this every time, and I just really want y'all to know that we really are we're always available for technical assistance to help, if you have questions about the application or about your project, whether it's a good fit or not, we're always happy to provide that technical assistance. Again, just use that salcp@conservation.ca.gov email, reach out to us, and we'll figure out what's the best way to assist you. We also have some technical assistance providers that can assist too, depending on what type of, what part of the program you're interested in applying to, and also geographically where you might be located. So again, we're happy to connect you with them. The best way is to reach out to us again, and then we can determine the sort of the best fit for that. But please reach out, don't hesitate. That's what we're here for. So in regards to the timing moving forward after the guidelines are finalized, so we'll be the acquisition and pre-proposals will be due for the acquisition pre-proposals rather will be due on June 16th. Planning pre-proposals are due on June 30th. Capacity applications, there's no pre-proposal on those, just a full application, and those are due on July 21st. And then the acquisition and planning applications, final applications, are due September 8th. And as a reminder, the acquisition part of the program does require that pre-proposal, and once we get those in mid-June, we will aim to provide feedback to the applicants within like a month or so after that. We don't have that date set, but we'll certainly let you know when we do have that set. So with that, I'll open it up for questions to see if anyone has any questions or if they have any comments or further clarifications. So let me go to the chat. And it looked like we had 2 chats. Let me see. And again, apologies for any confusion on the link. Start with the beginning. Just want to say there's a bunch of people. The link onto you. Janet, thank you for your comment. So excited that the award will now be 90% with only a 10% match needed. This is fantastic. We've heard great feedback about that. So yes, indeed. And Christina is one of our technical assistance providers. So they're focused on the planning grants in the Central Valley region. You can reach out to her, or if you want to reach out to us as well, and we can connect you. If we received a round 8 capacity grant, are we eligible to apply for round 9? Artemis, do you want to take that one? If you received a round 8 capacity grant for this particular program, for the capacity grants, we are not taking applications for those that were awarded. Is that just to confirm?
That is correct. If you have an active capacity grant with us, you are not eligible for submitting for another round. The only way that this would work, maybe in the next year or so, is when if your project is fully closed out before the applications are due, then you can apply for another round. But your project has to be complete before you can apply again.
I'd just like to clarify, this is Shauna Atherton-Bauer. I'm the program manager for SALC. I'd just like to clarify, if you have a SALC capacity grant with us, though, even though you're not eligible to apply for additional SALC capacity funding, you can apply for SALC acquisition funding.
Yes, indeed. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Shauna, for that clarifying piece. And then JT's asking, when will the acquisition pre-proposal grant templates be available to begin grant writing? So the pre-proposal and application documents will be made available when we post the final awarded, the final guidelines.
And that will be 10 days before the SGC council meeting, which I believe is scheduled for April 26th.
Yep.
Do I have that date right?
You do. That's perfect.
So all of the documents will be posted 10 days in advance of that. So by April 16th.
Yep. Thank you. And then Carol is asking, how are you defining tribal organization? That's a good question. We have, certainly California Native American tribes we have defined by either federally recognized or non-federally recognized through the Native American Heritage Commission. But for a tribal organization,
so other tribal organizations would be subject to the other kind of eligible applicants definition.
501c3s.
So that would include nonprofits.
Yep.
Generally that's the primary one. And so all nonprofits would have to have 501c3 status. We will be providing additional clarification, I think, in the final guidelines around what it means to be a tribal nonprofit.
Perfect. Thanks, Shauna. Mark Lee is asking, how does project criteria selection for SALC funded acquisition projects relate to the state's 30 by 30 goals? Shauna, you want to jump in on that one?
Generally speaking, our projects do support the state's 30 by 30 goals. All of the goals of the program are not all of, but a majority of the goals of the program are influenced by the state's 30 by 30 goals and the goals that were outlined in the governor's executive order, 30 by 30 executive order. So each selection criteria, so the goals selection criteria within the scoring, that's where the 30 by 30 goals are taken into account.
Perfect.
Does that answer your question, Mark Lee?
Great. If not, feel free to come off of chat or raise your hand. And then Hannah's asking the question regarding the capacity grant. So again, if you have a current acquisition grant, okay, this is a different scenario. Can you apply for a capacity grant if you have a current acquisition grant? Yes, I think the only limitation in regards to which components of SALC you can apply to if you currently have a grant with the SALC program would just be that capacity grant. So if you have a capacity grant currently, you would not be eligible to apply for the round 9 capacity grant, but you're more than welcome to apply for the other parts of the program, or if you have a SALC acquisition or planning grant, you're welcome to apply to the capacity grant. Hope that answers your question. The only limitation is if you currently have a capacity grant, the only thing you're limited in is not being able to apply for another capacity grant. Otherwise, the program is open, and actually the program builds on itself. So it's great to see like a planning grant in one round and then a round or two later applying for acquisition grants, because that's that connection of planning and then conserving. So the PowerPoint, I don't have a link to that. So what I'm going to do, Pamela, is I'm going to be sending a copy of the PDF and the recording out later today or tomorrow. And then Nick is asking, can you all share any information about the current status of program funding? The governor's proposed budget placed at the $25 million allocation for 23-24 on the list of trigger cuts. Does DOC have an idea of what you all plan to do if the funds are cut? Any insight into this would be greatly appreciated. Nick, that may be referring to a different general proposed budget piece. The SALC funding is continuously appropriated through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we're very comfortable and confident in our program funding. So, and Shauna, if you want to jump in, there was a $25 million allocation for something that was sort of SALC related, but it was not the SALC program.
Yeah, I'll jump in right here. So what Melinda said is exactly right. The base funding for SALC is through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and is continuously appropriated. So that our base funding will not be impacted by the budget cuts. The $25 million for projects consistent with SALC was in addition to that base funding. So no, we will not be receiving the $25 million because it is on the list of trigger cuts, or we do not anticipate receiving that. But our base funding is solid, and you can get a sense for what we anticipate receiving this year by looking at the current list of the last couple of quarters of cap and trade auction proceeds. But those are looking very healthy. So we encourage you to submit your applications as you would any year.
Great. Thanks for confirming, Shauna. And we don't know, we're not able to really announce what the funding looks like until September, but as Shauna mentioned, the quarterly auctions thus far look good. So
and just kind of, if people are curious, you can look at those quarterly auctions to get an idea of what SALC will be receiving. We receive 10% of the 20% that is continuously appropriated to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. So essentially that means we receive 2% of all GGRF auction proceeds.
Perfect. And then Sandra is asking on page 30 of the guidelines, it states the property is expected to be used for and is large enough to sustain commercial agricultural production. Would like to know, can you share more on what it means for a property to be expected to be used for ag versus being currently used for ag? Great question, Sandra. So as Michael mentioned, this is a change this year in regards to it used to be it needed to be currently in ag, where we've changed it to be expected to be used for ag. What it means for property to be expected to be used for, Sandra, maybe do you have an example? I'm wondering if that might be helpful. So, I mean, we'd like to know, and Michael, please jump in too. I think, that there's a viable plan for something on the property. It's in the process of being developed for, and would have the infrastructure for, agricultural production, commercial agricultural production. Michael, any additional thoughts, or Sandra?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Melinda. And I think the intent there is that the landowner just has a commitment to provide a viable agricultural commercial operation on the property. And I think that's something that can be, via management plan, or it can just be written into the narrative within the grant application itself. The intent is not, just to purchase property and there not be an agricultural operation on the property, but for the landowner to be committed to providing one, and through a conservation easement. I'm not sure if there's anything else more that is needed, but if you'd like, you can reach out to me and we can talk more offline about that.
And there's a follow-up question here in person. So
nice.
Just right here is fine.
Hi, I'm Teen Tran from Community Water Center. With partners, we're interested in submitting a comment letter and just wanted to ask a clarification question. So when deciding priority populations and reviewing projects, does the SALC program consider like the property size, and like, can you define what you mean by large enough to sustain commercial agriculture?
It's an excellent question. So when we do the priority population evaluation, it's based on CARB's priority population table. Melinda, would you be able to find a link to that and pop it in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Or the general sections.
Yeah, It's on the SALC
For those
page.
who are interested. So we don't necessarily there's no size limitation for an acquisition project or for any of the anything that we have here, capacity or acquisitions. There's no size limitations, but if it is a smaller property, then I would go into the detail of how it is a commercial operation. How are they sustaining agriculture in their region? Is it, a 5-acre block surrounded by agriculture is different than a 5-acre block surrounded by a city?
Yeah.
Right. So does it have the infrastructure to sustain agriculture over time, the necessary markets, those types of things?
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That's a great question. And Shauna, thank you for unpacking the acronym for California Air Resources Board.
I'm so sorry, you guys. It's just acronym galore.
And I just popped in a link for the priority populations sheet for that, and that's for acquisition. So there's a unique one for each component of the program, and all those are at the bottom of the page that has the draft guidelines on it. So there's links for each one of those there. That looks like all the questions in the chat, but we're always happy to have you. If you have some additional questions, you want to raise your hand, or if you have a comment, feel free to do so. That's what we're here today for.
We have one more question from the room.
Go for it.
Can you explain more about how you define agricultural practices that reduce negative public health impacts? And, does that talk about, is there incentives for regenerative farming, cover crops, and just thinking about soil health and all the other kind of multi-benefit practices that would be helpful?
Yes, that's a really good question. I don't know that we have anything necessarily defined or specific in the guidelines. I think that would be up to you or the applicant to provide a narrative of what those practices would be in the application, as well as, and honestly, I don't know, but do we have examples in the management plan at all? And then the co-benefit section would also be something to look to. But
Yeah,
In
so I
terms
think
of the
it's more in
negative practices, I do think the guidelines specify, such as practices that create dust or pesticide exposure, decrease water quality. So there are specific examples for negative practices outlined in the guidelines. And then, yeah, Michael touched on the benefits. In terms of how we might prioritize those benefits, again, that biodiversity is one of the program goals, so that's written in there. I'd have to double check whether or not sustainable management practices is still written in there or not. I believe it is. And then we do provide $10,000 for the development of either a management plan for properties or for the development of a carbon farm plan. So those are a couple of ways that we incentivize sustainable management practices, regenerative practices, et cetera.
Great. Thanks, Shauna and Michael, for clarifying. And additionally, there are other programs, obviously, too, that have funding available for some of those practices as well through natural resources, through CDFA and others. So Mark Lee has a question regarding the fee acquisition part of the SALC program. She said, for acquisition projects, how much of a fee acquisition will SALC fund? Specifically, is the amount of funding for a fee acquisition tied to the full market value of the conservation easement like it was in past rounds? I will answer that quickly to say yes, it's the same. So, and then in regards to the acquisition, the portion that SALC will fund, it depends. 90% at this point is what's proposed in the new guidelines, but they are potentially eligible for up to 100% if they meet the priority population benefit requirement, and also I believe tribes are also prioritized for that as well. But jump in to add more to that, Michael or Shauna.
Yeah, I will jump in, and this will also address Courtney's question. So as Melinda said, yes, it is the same. It's just the percentage that has changed. Tribes are the exception to that. For tribal fee acquisition, we will cover 100% of the fair market value. The tribe has to be an applicant or a co-applicant on the application, or it has to be a tribal nonprofit as an applicant or a co-applicant. And again, we'll provide a little bit more guidance on what tribal nonprofit means in the final version.
Super.
And if you want to provide comments on, what that definition looks like, please feel free to provide those comments.
Great, thank you.
I would just like to make one more plug. If anyone is interested in applying for the capacity grants, please reach out. We are available for technical assistance, even if it's just to bounce ideas of things that you're thinking about doing and wondering if it would be eligible or not. Send me an email, send the SALC email box an email, reach out to any one of us, and we'll try and help you out.
Thanks for reiterating that. That's great. Any other questions, thoughts, musings, wonderings? Well, if not, we'll stay on for a little bit longer, but if you all want to get started on your lunch early, we certainly don't want to get in your way. Happy to have you take off if you want, or if you want to stay and you have additional questions, we're happy to be here to answer them. And again, reach out to us anytime if you have questions. We're here to help you wherever we can. And you should be seeing, I'll be probably send out another email once the guidelines are posted, the guidelines are posted to the SGC site, and that the meeting is finalized, and the agenda will be on that as well. So, and also we'll be sending a link for the application workshops. Realizing that probably on this call we have people that know the program really well, or some people that are just starting to learn about the program. So, feel free to reach out if you have questions. And we do really encourage folks to do the application workshops if they're interested in applying. It's helpful in just making sure you have an understanding of what the requirements are of those applications and pre-proposals. And again, apologies if there was a glitch in the link or problems. It looked like a lot of people were on maybe got a link to the Wednesday meeting, so apologies for that. You're welcome, Courtney. Yeah, I think that change in match funding has been very well received. You all are welcome. Glad it was helpful today. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Markley. And if you're still on the call and you have questions, just feel free to take yourself off of mute. Hi, Pamela. Glad you're. Oops, she just left. Sarah, if you have any questions, feel free to take yourself off of mute.